why the focus on younger people, right? What is it? Is it to reach people like yourself? And what's being done at the professional levels?
I think the effort at reaching younger peoples really stems from the rise in anxiety and depression that's been shown to just be kind of exponentially increasing, especially in the kind of 16, 17-year-old age group. So if you look at anxiety and depression rates it's kind of getting worse for everyone, but for these 16, 17-year-olds, like the line just kind of jumps compared to all other age groups. And that's scary to me. And also, I think just having therapy services is not going to be the answer. I love therapy. I feel like the Brain Learning Center is maybe giving you a taste of some of the language that's used in therapy. It's not a therapy center, but maybe it can be kind of a platform for people to seek to improve these things more if they need it in their own lives. But, it also is born out of, one, seeing these jumps in mood disorders, and then two, working with kids in the clinic and realizing, and they're under so much pressure, and a lot of them don't have, some of the coping skills that they need to deal with the unique modern pressures that they're all under. College is so competitive, even and just like the general stress environment of the world with kind of racism and fears about what's going on. So just to start getting language, like kids to be familiar with language and to know, like, you're not stupid if you make a mistake, and that's something called a labeling thinking trap, and here's why your brain is going to do that. We talk a lot about thinking traps in the Brain Learning Center, as these are automatic shortcuts that your brain takes, and they're really helpful in some situations. So if like a car's coming and you're in the street, you want to be able to immediately jump out of the way, and that's a shortcut that your brain has that it takes automatically. Or, if you're in the woods and you hear a twig snap, you want to be on high alert and think, oh, there's some danger coming, because it's adaptive to do so. But if you put a kid in, a math class and they're struggling and they don't get something immediately, you don't want a thinking trap to be automatically going to, I'm stupid, I'm not good at math. But that's where a lot of people go, either culturally, because of the unique language that we use around pressure and kind of talent, being innately good at something. And so we wanted to start to open that conversation up younger and be able to maybe start talking with some of these kids about the ingredients that underlie mood disorders. And they all exist on a spectrum, right? It's not like depression is something that we probably all experience. We have depressive thoughts and feelings and symptoms at different times in our life. And it's how overwhelming do they get? How well do we think we can cope with them? And those are really what will make somebody resilient over time. And so that's kind of where the Brain Learning Center, we're hoping to be maybe that first entry or an amplifying voice in those common ingredients that you can use to cope and build resilience in your life.
Yeah, I guess the flip side is, right, the brain at that age is changing so much, the capacities for growth. So if we can kind of hardwire in some positive habits, right, and shortcut some of these traps, which can be like harmful, and if we shut down always when we perceive a threat. Well, nowadays in this high-paced society, right, there's constant threats, even coming from social media, so much information. So learning how to, like, I think that Peter Levine calls it in somatic experience, inhibit the inhibitory response, right? Because, right, in nature, right, you could see that there's a snake or it's just a twig, and then you can kind of keep walking along the prairie and see the mountain view and realize that your system quickly shifts back to the parasympathetic. But when we're, in a competitive environment or in a classroom where it's constantly about achievement, or winning in a sports team, right? It can be really detrimental if we don't know where that next place to draw upon the parasympathetic response is.
Mm-hmm. And it'd be great for us to have, as a society, this idea that mental health fitness is something that you can build just like your exercise fitness. You know, it's something that's worth investing in no matter who you are. You don't have to be quote unquote depressed or quote unquote anxious to learn more about your brain systems and how they work, so that, you know, when you're 30 and something really terrible in your life happens, you're not just hit out of the blue with, oh my gosh, I need to figure out how to cope differently, that everything that's worked up until now is not working now. Now you have a much wider depth of experience about what your brain needs to get you through, like the death of a parent, the death of a child, something really tragic, and to know when to need help and when and what kinds of resources to use. And so I'm hoping that the Brain Learning Center can at least maybe start to reprogram some of those ideas, that mental health is an active effort. It's not something we're just born with. It's something that changes throughout your life, and there's skills to be built and skills to be practiced.
Really, really empowering message. And obviously, you know, like how to, you know, getting this out to the masses and doing so through the online medium. What's next, as we shift hopefully out of quarantine, but still navigate these kind of trying times? You mentioned diversity. We faced, at the time of this recording, a week of
Mm-hmm.
protests and tremendous conflict over equality in our country. How do we reach, you know, the sporting populations in diverse areas and bring this information global?
Yeah, I think that's an area that we've all really fallen behind on, and an area that needs a lot of conversation, both internally and then within our communities. One of the things that we are going to try to do is we're going to be releasing a class, or like a workshop program every month, based on current event topics, and trying to help people understand them maybe in the light of how your brain is functioning. And our first one is going to be about racism, the neuroscience of racism. And there's been some amazing work that's already been done, but I think the conversation about that needs to be louder and ongoing. And so, you know, we are built with this threat system that sees anything that's different than ourselves as, again, threatening, as stress provoking. And that is a feature of our brain. And we have to actively work to understand how that's influencing us in all these different situations, especially when it comes to, in America, especially, you know, perceiving Black people. And to me, police violence is very understandable in this context of their brains are on higher threat alert because Black people look different. There's been a constant narrative of, you know, Black threat and stereotyping, especially of Black males, as being, you know, all these horrible things. And that's been a constant dialogue in our culture for a long time, boiling under the surface or even more overtly. And so understanding that those types of things are written into the networks of all white Americans' brains, and that will just enhance the stress response in those clutch moments when somebody's life is at stake or when a police officer feels threatened. And if we can learn about those, then that's going to, one, bring knowledge of it out from the amygdala and threat circuitry into the prefrontal cortex, which is your CEO, which is your place that's more rational, that says when that twig snaps, oh, that's not, you know, that's not a bear. It's going to be that place that says, oh, I'm reacting more anxiously because this is a Black man or a Black woman. And it puts it into a place of more control. I need to check my internal responses. And if we can learn about that, then hopefully we can understand much more about, you know, our underlying systemic racism. So that's our first goal, is to try to hold these classes for, you know, geared at
It's
white people.
amazing how you broke that down. Yeah, it really is, right? I know, you know, one of my gentlemen, we're releasing our panel for retired athletes, and former, you know, he's a Black athlete. He said he's, I think, thinking about putting out a podcast called Dear White People, you
Mm-hmm.
know, kind of just explaining some of these things that about privilege and about the ways that are unconsciously built in. You know, and not to shame people. There is some reason why historically, when you lived in a out in the woods and in society that you wanted to stay with those that you felt were from your little tribe. That somehow you identify safety. That the
Yes.
safety mechanism, a lot of what Simon Sinek does on culture and building your tribe, it's really important.
Yes.
But right, but along the same lines are all the things that were built in that were not healthy, and now we know that, right, in the global world you could be, more similar to someone who lives, and speaks a different language and lives on a different part of the globe and was raised completely differently than you are sometimes to people from your own neighborhood.
Mhm.
um,
Absolutely. And it's because you have a smoke alarm built into your brain that doesn't follow any logic and is not politically correct and doesn't follow it. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to know that our amygdala network, our limbic emotional system, is going to fire at anything and everything. That's its job. If you hear your name across a crowded room, your amygdala fires a little bit. It said, "Oh, be alert." But it works against our community. It works against Black people in particular, because there are ways that it's framed. If you look at a CEO, if you look at a boardroom and you see all white faces, and then you see somebody of color, your amygdala is going to fire differently just because it's a different type of, it looks different. And we need to own that. And, we need to arm ourselves with that knowledge so that we can be responsible for how that changes our behaviors, because it does.